From Paul's letter to the Romans. God, who did not withhold God's own Son, but gave him up for all of us, will he not with him also give us everything else? Peace be with you, dear friends in faith. I invite you to think with me for a few minutes about these words of St. Paul. They may be familiar to you, but the sentence structure is a little awkward, as sometimes happens in translation. So let me break it down for you a bit and read it again. God, who did not withhold God's own Son, but gave him up for us all, will he not with him also give us everything else? Let's take a closer look at that. Paul starts, as all things do, with God. Everything else we hear in this verse will be in reference to God, the first noun, and the primary actor. Paul goes on to tell us about what we understand as the most awesome, compassionate, grace-filled action of God. God did not hold back God's own Son, but gave him up. For those of us who are parents, we know how it feels to not hold back our children, but to release them into the world, a world that, as in Jesus' case, can be hostile and even deadly. And while those of us who are human parents can hope and pray that our children may not fall victim to this deadly hostility, God, of course, knew better. And even knowing this, God did not hold back. Pause and meditate on that for a moment. That is inconceivable grace and love. Only at this point in Paul's affirmation do we find out the focus or recipients of God's overwhelming act of grace in Jesus. All of us, Paul says. We do not know for sure who the us is of whom Paul speaks. The Christians in Rome? All the Christians Paul knew? All Christians of all times and places? All humanity? Given what we know of God, it is safe to say the all of us, who is the subject of God's divine activity, is all humanity. God so loved the world, John the Evangelist tells us. That's revolutionary, as it includes not only all of humanity, but all of creation. More to ponder and meditate upon. The next phrase is, for me, the most awkward. Paul writes, will he not with him also give us everything else? Another way to put this might be, since God gave us the Son, Jesus the Christ, won't God give us everything else we need? In other words, God already gave us the best, so God in love will give us the rest. The rest of the passage supports this understanding as Paul goes on to talk about nothing being able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus. Here in this season of Thanksgiving is where my heart and attention go. Will God not give us everything else? Although I do not get everything I want, that's a good thing too. And we could debate pessimism, optimism, glass half empty, glass half full. The affirmation of our faith is that we are blessed. God has not held back the gift of the Son. That makes a world of difference. And on top of that, every one of us has received uncountable blessings, though again, not always the ones we've asked for. Here's my ask to you. In light of this fundamental reality, what we rightly call amazing grace, how will you respond? Since God has given everything to us, what will we do with it? If you're beginning to suspect that this has morphed into a stewardship talk, you are absolutely right. First, I had to use the foundation in God's generosity to us, and I now boldly ask you to share that generosity in response to God. I think you have already sensed and share my passion for this gospel message of God, not withholding. And since we as Lutheran Christians in the Metropolitan New York Synod are called to live like Christ in our communities by being evangelists of this good news, you know we need your support so all of us together can continue to courageously proclaim in word and action the reality of God who gives everything for all of us. I know these have been tough times, and I'm grateful to hear from many of our congregations and ministry sites that your generosity has kept pace with the need. As your bishop, I ask you as members, ministry sites, congregations, deacons, and pastors, fellow disciples, all of you, to continue to be generous and to include mission support in that generosity. You have heard me say before that this time and place are urgent for our message of God's love and acceptance. We in the office of the bishop and the Synod Council have been working diligently to be faithful stewards of your gifts. We need your support for the mission we are called to together. Our aim is to accompany, support, and inspire you in your lives of discipleship. To the extent that you are able, I pray that you will be faithful and generous, and that through time and treasure, continue in this vital life-giving work in response to our God who did not withhold. And thank you. I'm grateful.